what you want to do. Be yourself. If you want, let it go. Be yourself. You're not ready, and I know that you were gonna call it back, and I ain't gonna hold you back, and there ain't nothing wrong with that. Not you when I give you back. Be yourself. If you want, let it go. Be yourself. You're not ready, and I know that you were gonna call it back, and I ain't gonna hold you back, and there ain't nothing wrong with that. Not you when I give you back. My mama used to tell me to love the skin I'm in. I didn't always understand her. I didn't always listen, but now I know better. Now I know better. I didn't like my curls that grew up to the sun because I wanted to fit in and look like everyone else around me. Until I found me. Ebony chocolate or cafe au lait. Our skin is gorgeous no matter what they say. So block out the noise, hear the voice of God who made us well as he whispers to you. Let it break through and know your black is beautiful. It's beautiful. This world holds so much danger for people with this skin, 'cause people stay trying to put out the light we have within, but we can't let them. No, we can't let.
Cool. Okay. So hi everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening and taking a break from your finals. So my name is Nani and I'm the GSA rep of joining us this evening. And so it's my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce to you our guests for the evening. And just to let you know, the way the panel is going to go is we're going to have 30 minutes towards the end for questions. But please feel free to post your questions in the chat as we go along so that we can pull them now and get to as many as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you our panelists. So first of all, the inspiring and inspired Professor Pia Raymond. So Pia earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from Boston University, and she is also a Silver alum. So her NYU Silver Social Work study in Puerto Rico especially equipped her for practice with diverse Spanish-speaking communities. She exercises with cultural humility and has deeply engaged children and families through social work practice at the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services and the New York City Mission Society. She's also a community activist, a community and political activist, and ran for city council in 2017. She's a champion for literacy with an emphasis on social and emotional learning. And she even wrote a children's book titled Celebrate Smiles, which teaches self-esteem, love, and thankfulness. She is one of the founders of Creating Legacies, a nonprofit organization inspiring community building through nurturing entrepreneurs and offering families diverse social and educational experiences. And then in the educational sector, Pia served as the 2018 to 2019 co-chair of the Diversity Committee at the Packer Collegiate Institute in New York City. Her experiences as an alum of the Oliver Scholars Program allows Pia a unique opportunity to render her services to the Oliver students and parent body through educating about mental health, particularly during the pandemic. As a speaker, Pia engages diverse audiences around race and cultural humility, political agency, collective trauma and healing, and the importance of self-care. She continues to share her expertise as a professor of social work at NYU Silva with a particular emphasis on the needs of immigrant communities and those reflective of the African diaspora. And then our second panelist for the evening is the revolutionary Dr. Kirk J. James. Dr. James is an evolving human being committed to healing from the perpetuity of trauma inflicted by white supremacy while working to co-create a world without police, jails, prisons, and systems rooted in domination. Jay believes in the right of every human being to self-actualize in a manner that honors planet Earth. He's a faculty member at NYU Silver School of Social Work, where he utilizes love and liberatory pedagogy to inform transformative praxis. And of course, the incomparable Ericka Hart. So Ericka, pronouns she, they, is a Black queer femme activist, writer, highly acclaimed speaker, and award-winning sexuality educator with a Master's of Education in Human Sexuality from Widener University. Ericka's work broke ground when she went topless, showing her double mastectomy in public in 2016. Since then, she has been in demand at colleges and universities across the country, featured in countless digital and print publications like Vogue, The Washington Post, Allure, Harper's Bazaar, Vice, Paper Mag, BBC News, Cosmopolitan, Vanity Fair, W Magazine, Glamour, Elle, and Essence. Ericka's voice is rooted in leading edge thought around human sexual expression as inextricable to overall human health and its intersections with race, gender, chronic illness, and disability. Both radical and relatable, she continues to push well beyond the threshold of sex positivity. Ericka Hart has taught at sexuality education for elementary aged youth to adults across New York City for over 10 years, including 4 years at Columbia University School of Social Work and the CUNY School of Public Health at Hunter College. They are currently an adjunct faculty at Widener University's Center for Human Sexuality, a bratty, switchy, Sagittarius service bottom who misses Whitney more than you. So without further ado, I'm going to let the panel commence.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so glad that we're all here today. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited that we're here. So I think I'm supposed to maybe do a human-centered exercise and one of the just really a grounding exercise. And one of the things that I was thinking about is I would love to read this excerpt from Adrienne Maree Brown's We Will Not Cancel Us. It's an amazing book that was sent to me by a really good friend. And I think it just kind of really speaks to why this work needs to really be like human-centered, and this work needs to really begin with a lot of humility in relation to each other. So Adrienne Maree Brown says, how do I hold a systemic analysis and approach when each system I'm critical of is peopled in part by the same flawed and complex individuals that I love? This question always leads me to self-reflection. If I can see the ways I'm perpetuating systemic oppression, if I can see where I learn the behavior and how hard it is to unlearn, I start to have more humility as I see the messiness of the communities I am a part of, the world that I live in. So I just want to say thank everyone for coming and just really understand that this is, Professor Hart's work. This is really human work, right? This is like transformative work. This work may feel a little bit challenging for some people here today to sit with. And I just ask everyone to just show up with the idea that this isn't like us versus them. We're all a part of like the collective change. And the more honest that we can engage with each other in that process, the more human that we can engage with each other in the process, it's the easier it allows us to get there. So I just wanted to say that, I'm very thankful to be in this conversation with you today, Professor Hart. I'm very thankful to be in this conversation with you today, Professor Raymond, as you're one of my favorite human beings in this world. So thank you. Maybe do we want to just maybe start by saying how we came to this work? And Professor Hart, if you don't mind, like I think, your work speaks for itself, but maybe like, how did you come to this work?
Sure. So hi everybody. I am a sexuality educator and I have been so for the past 11 years. I worked primarily with secondary students, elementary, middle, and high school. And then I got training through a master's program out of Pennsylvania. And I started working at the collegiate level. And one of my first jobs was working at Columbia School of Social Work and training social workers. I am not a social worker, but I have been in the presence of many social workers in my master's programs and also as a client to many therapists. So in working in the School of Social Work, I had to really tailor my sex ed courses, and I also taught a gender course there, to what would be beneficial to future social workers, and also had to understand the history and the violence that social workers have caused, right? The creation, how social work came to be by white cis women essentially wanting to use their guilt to further disenfranchise Black communities. And that was something that a lot of my students had never known and didn't understand. And then also bringing in how academic institutions and social work hand in hand with the state. So that all plays a role, believe it or not, in our understanding of sex and sexuality, and also how we interpret our own gender identity, how we get to exist or not inside of our gender identity. So that's how I came into this work, specifically with social workers.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's so real. As you were saying that, I think about, people have asked me before, who's your favorite social worker? And I'll be like, Harriet Tubman, because of this like very professionalization of social work and not really honoring that, there are people who have been doing this work like forever. There are people who, and have done it in really honorable ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Professor Raymond, how did you come to this work?
Well, I'm a Brooklyn girl from Flatbush, Crown Heights community. So I feel like everything about that experience for me growing up led me to this work. And I didn't have a definition for it as social work. I grew up in like the 80s and 90s. So I think both of you have a real deep Brooklyn ties. So just understanding the violence that were in the streets, it was really the rise of HIV/AIDS in our community, and just really experiencing all of that firsthand through, we had a family business in the Crown Heights section. So every day really experiencing people that I loved and care about, and the stresses that really impacted us and really stole a lot of lives, literally and figuratively, in the community. So I knew that there was something that could be done. And I felt like I was purposed to be a part of that growth and evolution for all of us. So I did go on to sort of the formal study psychology in undergrad, and then came to NYU for social work at the advice of a professor, because really I just wanted to open a youth program right on Nostrand Avenue to really just jump in and serve the people that were my own people and my own experience. So came to it formally through studying social work at the graduate level. And then over the years have done a lot of work engaging youth directly in Flatbush and Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy. And then additionally, I did run for office, and really not separating the micro, meso, macro as we talk about in the social work school, but just if I'm working with clients every day, if I'm working in community every day, and I see greater needs that have to be served in order for the quote unquote person and environment to thrive and flourish, then it just seemed normal for me to go ahead and say, okay, well, something needs to be advocated on a deeper level. So I'm going to take that step, and whether it's with the school superintendent or any aspect of our community that we see where policy impacts, especially our young minds and our young children, just took the steps to make that happen. So that was sort of how it continued to grow from working directly in community to sort of this macro focus in political activism.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think my, similar to both of you, my intro to this work really starts just, being a quote unquote Black man born in a captive world. I grew up in the Caribbean, and really from an early age, understanding through the music, through the culture, the history of resistance, understanding the history of slavery, moving to the United States in the late 80s and really understanding like racism for like the first time as you know, like a young Black man growing up in the 90s. And one of the things that Pia and I, we always talk about is just like what the 90s was. And the 90s was a period of significant incarceration for, you know, Black and brown men in particular. And being incarcerated at 18 years old and feeling like, wow, you know, what is this experience? And ultimately realizing that this experience wasn't just happening to me, that this experience was happening to, you know, 1 in 3 Black men who look like me, and feeling the need to wanting to be a part of dismantling that, and seeing social work as a vehicle for that. And similar to what you said, Professor Hart, you know, recognizing once I got into social work that, wow, like we're actually, in many ways, we're fostering carceral systems, we're fostering mechanisms of harm more so than we're dismantling them. And really then trying to find my place in the profession, as I do believe in the profession. I think sometimes it's hard for us to say that, but I believe I've met enough good people in the profession to really believe that, you know, the possibility of change exists. But it really begins, as you said, Professor Hart, and as you said, Professor Raymond, when we can begin to tell like the truth of what these systems are and the things that they have done thus far. So that was really my intro to social work and my intro to thinking about anti-oppressive practice. So maybe that's a good segue for us to kind of like begin to talk about like, what does anti-oppressive practice like look like for us in micro macro ways, and the challenges of that. And I think you've said that to some degree already, Professor Hart, just speaking about being in social work and realizing that, you know, a lot of the things that were happening weren't really aligned with the values. So maybe, do you want to speak a little bit about what anti-oppressive approaches or anti-oppressive practice looks like for you, and maybe some of the challenges in the systems that you've tried to do it?
Sure. I think one of the major challenges that I've had is realizing the wool has been pulled over my eyes in the field of academia, and being a part of academia for far too many years. But, you know, since I was, you know, old enough to read and write, or was able to do those things. So I started to realize how much academia was not innocent, right? And how it was actually a participant in orchestrating state violence, right? Whether it be through dress codes, heavy policing, having students, young people walk through metal detectors, the cradle to prison pipeline. Like, I just started to realize how much schools are a participant in that. And, you know, you opened with a quote from We Will Not Cancel Us, and you mentioned that it is not us versus them. But I want to push back on that a little bit, because it is, right? And I think that it is terrifying to suggest that it's not, considering that we are in the midst of a genocide, right? And this country really sat back and let Black and Latinx, fat, poor people die from COVID because they weren't interested in our survival. That is, it, by definition, an us versus them. What's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Bogota, what's happening in East Oakland, what's happening in Flatbush, what's happening in Crown Heights. It's, you know, it's just everywhere, right? There's no denying that. And I think what school has done, the academic institutions are committed to, are de-radicalizing folks to believe that it's not an us versus them. And if we come together in kumbaya, then things will shift. And if that's a good person, then maybe the system will change. But the thing is the system even tries to take out the quote unquote good person, right? And if you are, as Dr. Joy James says, you know, the system is not interested in you pushing up against it, right? It doesn't reward those who do that, right? It's going to reward the people who don't, right? Who are silent, who are complicit, who agree with it, who find ways to quote unquote integrate or reform the system. That's who the system supports, because it doesn't actually threaten the system. But who the system does push out is radicals, is folks who are interested in abolishing it. So what I come up against is, I'm existing inside of capitalism. I have to be able to make money, but I also want academic institutions, the field of social work, police, policing in this country, presidents, right? White supremacy, all of it, I want it to be abolished, right? Medical institutions, the fact that medical institutions are built on the displacement and genocide of Indigenous and Black communities, just like academic institutions are. I mean, NYU, Columbia, these are all institutions that were supported by chattel slavery. So that what I come up against is, I love to teach so much, but I don't need this institution, right? And I'm forced to need it because I live in a capitalist society, but that doesn't mean that I need to celebrate it, right? I don't need to honor an institution that invited a dictator just last week to come and speak, right? I don't need to celebrate an institution that pays a president, a white cis man, $1 million a year, right? When I'm certain the landscaper, the landscaping staff, the janitors, the dining hall staff, the folks who housekeep the dorms are not making $1 million a year, right? I'm not going to salute or celebrate an institution. And I think institutions, all of them, really organize us to celebrate them. And I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in abolishing them. And that is going to require a lot of imagination.
No, thank you. And you know, just to add clarity, the clarity was really more about like us as human beings together in this process, not us versus them. Like, we're collectively in the process. The systems have definitely done what the systems have done, like to your point, and thank you for that honesty, because we need to speak the honesty and the truth of what they are. So thank you. Professor Raymond, do you have anything you want to add? Or
I guess in the work that I do, so I teach social work practice. So that's the sort of introductory for the first year students. So I take that very seriously in the matter of, most of the students are going into the communities that I'm speaking about: Crown Heights, Flatbush, Fort Greene, Bed-Stuy, Brownsville, East New York, and maybe have never even been to New York before, maybe have never interacted with a person of color, much less an African-American man or anyone in the Latinx community. So it's very important to me to sort of shed a little bit of light or perspective on what the lived experience is like, in addition to what we may, be given in the syllabus or what we're given in the course material, but really taking time to extract away from the course material and talk about, what are the feelings that you're having when you're going into these communities, so we can kind of unpack some of that in the classroom, so that it's not being unleashed in the community. Because I know what it is to be a child in a school where a teacher hates us, where a teacher has taught us the word abomination, because that's what they called us in the 4th grade. So that's a very real and present sentiment growing up here in Brooklyn and going to public schools in the area. So I definitely don't take it lightly, having the opportunity to teach students that are coming into our community specifically for the first time as students, and even what that means to be engaging clients in counseling, engaging clients in family, group, couples dynamics, and be a student in the first semester, in the first couple of weeks, for a family that has collective trauma, that has community trauma, that has compounded trauma from all aspects of their lives, and are so vulnerable to be in the hands of someone that has never even thought about what it is to have a conversation with a person of color. So in those ways, sort of in the classroom, is bringing that anti-oppressive perspective, at least through my lens, to the students. And then direct work in community, I'm always bouncing in and out. So when we were on campus, that was just a part of my day to sort of come from the communities into the NYU area. And now with Zoom, it still has the same dynamic. So just making sure that I'm always grounded with my people in community and have a sense of the pulse of what's happening day to day and what are the experiences and how do they shift from moment to moment, especially in this time with the pandemic, the racial reckoning, the environmental degradation is specifically affecting our Caribbean islands in particular, and how that affects all of our family members and members of community right here in the city.
Thank you. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were speaking, as you were both speaking, and you kind of like brought that into full front, Professor Hart, is how do we reconcile that we're working in systems of oppression? How do we reconcile that, you know, maybe to what Audre Lorde says, in many ways we're, you know, like we are working, we're using the master's tools, right? To some degree. How do we balance that tension? And it's a tension that you brought up, like that's very real, because these systems have ideologically supported genocide as well as the practicality of it. And how do we, you know, like work in that? Because I feel like that's a tension for students, you know, it's a tension for everyone, right? And what are some of the ways that you've been able to navigate that?
I am I am very fond of the practice of calling out, calling under, calling around. So when I'm in my classrooms, I'm calling out the institution, right? We are speaking about the institution in very clear, not like sort of esoteric, but just very, this is what has happened. These are the stories that are oftentimes erased, and also contesting with who gets surveilled in these spaces, right? Who are the stories that are always, that academic institutions always want to kind of read and tell and be inspired by, but then are still actively gentrifying places like the East Village, the Lower East Side, Harlem, right, et cetera, et cetera. So it looks like not replicating the tools of the oppressor, right? I'm not using the tools to dismantle, right? That's the whole quote. It's like, I'm not interested in that. I want to constantly be checking myself in those terms, because it does start internally, right? A lot of times I think our anti-oppressive work, and I think very validly, is that it looks this way, like it's like this, you're doing this and you're doing that. And we also have to be looking at what is the colonizer in our head saying, what have we inherited about the world, and what are we projecting to position ourselves. And I think we really have to check, you know, our comfort, right? And how we get positioned in places where whiteness supports us and lifts us up and is not contested in our presence, right? And to be constantly looking at like, oh, like I've had this job for 15 years and have never been kicked out. And the racism that happened, I just kind of, you know, figured it would blow over and I'd still keep my job, right? There's nothing on the line. And I think for me is that I always want to have something on the line, because I'm interested in something bigger than I have a job. And that is not just coming from a place of privilege, as from someone that has a savings account. That's also the same person who didn't have a savings account, who got fired from jobs just because I was unwilling to deal with the anti-Blackness that was happening. And that's not to say that you should just be walking out of jobs without savings. I think and the labor also not being on Black femmes, right? And it always looks like that, right? It always looks like Black femmes are the voice and the heart of so many movements, and that being assumed is so painful and so laborious. So being mindful of what I have the capacity to do, and also caring for myself in the process.
You just like drop like bomb, 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 bomb. And I just wanted to like, there's so many pieces I want to extract out of that feels like really important for this conversation. So maybe like one piece feels like the reciprocal process, you know, just seeing, you know, like the transformation, the abolition as not just an external process, but an internal process. I would love for you to speak about that a little bit more, because I feel with students, it's very easy to come in and be like, let's do that, and not look at the mirror, you know? So I feel like that piece feels really powerful. The other piece that you just spoke about, which I think is really, really important, is how capitalism legitimizes us in systems of oppression, which then don't allow us to show up to dismantle them, because our identity is so connected with that we become like agents of these systems. And I think, like, you know, the piece about capitalism feels like we don't talk about that enough in this work. So I don't know if any of those appeal to you and you want to jump in any of those ways.
Yeah, I can just elaborate. Like, I just think that, again, looking at what are the thoughts that you've inherited from the world that you believe is true, right? We also don't really discuss fat phobia in this work, and how much we chastise fat folks. Even our seats in schools, right? They aren't even large enough for a fat person, right? Indicating that this space is not for fat people, and that there's something wrong with fat people where they need to fix their bodies to even be able to fit in a physical space. So really checking that, how does that show up in your organizing work, or in who you fight for, right? And who you care about, who you organize around. And then with capitalism, wherever there is racial injustice, there is wealth inequity. So that is why there's so many breakdowns at a place like NYU, Columbia, the list goes on, because you have presidents making so much money, and then other adjunct professors, for example, graduate assistants, right, not making much at all, not even able to make ends meet, not being able to get their material needs met. That doesn't work, and it's all dependent on anti-Blackness, and people have to really get that connection. Well, people will say, well, a president does lots of things, that's why they should get paid that much. And I'm like, okay, so a janitor doesn't, right? An adjunct professor doesn't, a tenure professor doesn't, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. It's so arbitrary, and it's so dependent on white supremacy that most of the presidents across this country in higher ed are white, and they're white cis men. That's not a coincidence, right? That is just literally the linking of capitalism and white supremacy. They need each other in order to live. I hope that was more of an elaboration on the point.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Professor Raymond.
I was gonna say, one of the other pieces I feel is important, and that just might be, you know, from my own growing up, is starting your own businesses and nonprofit organizations. So in my class, we definitely spend time, especially when we're talking about macro work, well, it's not necessarily integrated into the syllabus that way, but really getting students to explore what are the gaps that you're seeing consistently in service delivery. What are the aspects of bias and discrimination in either the aspect of the field you're interested in or where you're serving currently, that you see where you can make an impact and make a change, because it can't always be done going to the same agencies you've been going to and applying for jobs and careers in those places. It's really creating that space that is going to be different, as using the network of students, of other faculty, to really build a network for what that work can look like. And so part of the reason I look forward to the space like this and being in your presence, Ericka and Jay, is how do we now expand this network of those of us who have the wool was never over the eyes, to say, okay, well, how do we make a space right now? And how do we make it powerful and impactful for everyone that looks like us, for those that have not even been seen at all, so that we can really flourish in a way that brings us into the future. And this moment, with everything we've endured in this year, that's just sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, I feel like this is a moment that we have a complete world shift, and how we embrace that and move into it can make all the difference. So even I'm hearing what you're saying about, I mentioned with my class the other day about the chairs with the little flip arms. That is not, we shouldn't even think about going back in the fall. We may be appearing again in person, but we have an opportunity to determine what that will look like, and it can continue to shape and move as we move.
Bomb. Love it. But one of the things that you both said, and I think is integral to like like oppressive work, right, is this idea of like imagination. I always think like oppression like handicaps our imagination of what's possible. And I know if anyone you all speak to that, but it just feels like there needs to be like I hate the word radical imagination. It's kind of gotten corny, but we just need to be able to imagine something like different from these systems. And it feels like oppression often doesn't allow us that. And the second piece is, in that imagination, how do we, like mutual aid has become a big thing during COVID, but how do we kind of like collectively share resources, and how do we re-envision even what the work looks like? Mm-hmm. Knowing that capitalism is not the answer. So we're maybe a good transition question is like, we've talked a lot about a lot of things that, feel harmful to us in the academy and navigate in these spaces. And I think to Audre Lorde's point, where Audre Lorde says, self-care is an act of political resistance. And I think that, I often tell students in the academy that really it's not like it's cliche. We talk about self-care, but I think especially for you, Ericka, in your work, I mean, what does self-care mean for you? Like, I mean, from the micro to the macro.
Well, I love social workers with this macro and micro. I just I love it so much.
It's not even real.
It's not real.
They're not real.
I'm just like, what? I'm just gonna talk about all of it. Professor Raymond mentioned we shouldn't even be going back in the fall, right? Mm-hmm. And that is how you have community care, right? Like you really care for people. It's like this country said, there's a global pandemic happening in the world. We are not going to cancel rent. We are not going to cancel mortgage payments. You are still going to have to pay for your health insurance, and you're still going to have to work, even though you are losing family members and friends, and you're still going to have to go to school, right? And schools didn't say, you know what, we care about our students' well-being and their health. We are going to refund all of them. We're going to pay all of our staff, all of our professors, and send them home so they could care for their families and care for their bodies through this really challenging time. They said, no, you have to have these assignments, you have to turn them in, and they'll be due, right? So when we talk about self-care, I think we have to go a step further and talk about community care and acknowledge the structures that really prohibit us from having any sort of care, right? And as a professor, during the pandemic, I just stopped all due dates and was just like, it's just due at the end, right? Whatever you need to do, just submit the assignment at the end. And also, it's just going to be a guaranteed A, right? If you don't turn anything in, that I don't know what to tell you. But other than that, it's just going to be, if you turn something in, just turn something in, it's guaranteed, right? And it just wasn't enough people doing that, but also just not enough adjunct professors, right? Which so many adjunct professors are the backbone of these institutions, don't get paid enough in order to actually do that, right? And there's so much pressure around being an adjunct professor to perform well that it's even challenging to be able to do that. So I always go a step further. I'm like, of course, take a magnesium zinc bath, do a face mask, read some Audre Lorde, read some Assata Shakur, read some Dr. Joy James, listen to some Donny Hathaway, right? And I want to give a nod to how Black people have already have the imagination around this work, right? We've already created things like susus in ways that we could combine money and come together, right? We care for each other in community, right? It takes a village to raise a child is an African proverb, right? We work in community. We have created imaginatively a Black people, right? That was created out of nothing. There was no Black community. If it wasn't for Black people who were like, look, this is who we are, right? We're going to create something out of this captive experience. So I want to just give a nod and all praise to Black people all the time for our imagination and really contributing anything to this country at all when we could just burn it down, honestly. But my concern is that white folks don't really, as my good friend Whit Washington says, white people don't have the imagination, right, to really end something that they created. And I think that is where the rubber meets the road, is that Black people, even doing anti-racism work, anti-oppressive work, cannot build an imagination for white people. And that's, I guess this goes back to a question that you had before. It's like, what are some of the roadblocks in doing this work? But also that is something that impacts my own care, right? And how I care for myself, is this profound heartbreak that this country, I won't see this country shift in my lifetime.
Thank you. Something you said that I feel like is really, I mean, everything you said is really powerful, yet it feels like this idea of separating individual care from community care is part of like meritocracy, right? Like this idea that there is some type of separation. And I feel, you know, that is really a powerful statement for us all to think about, right? Like, can I actually ever feel whole, feel happy, feel joy, knowing that what's transpiring in the world? So thank you for that truth. Professor Raymond, anything you want to add?
So I guess for me, the self-care part of my boundary struggle is the self-care is not often separate from the community care. So I think in so many ways, when I'm in service to community, it does really fill me up. You know, as much as I'm pouring out, it fills me up at the same time. You know, being able to engage with youth in the community, with our seniors, and really connecting with them, and even just getting those intergenerational stories, because our narrative as people of color, as Black people specifically, have been so lost and robbed and revoked over the generations. And each time it seems we have a little bit of documentation, is taken again, or it's out of print if it's of our great authors that we recognize. So now in turn, I have two young ones, 9 and 6. When I'm looking for stories and poetry for them, I'm digging in my own crates, and paper is literally falling apart when I pull out my Dunbar poetry for them. So I really get filled up from being connected to community, and I don't ever let that bridge not be present. So for as much work that I love to do with students, that I love to do within the setting of the classroom, I'm doing so much more in the actual community. And then with friends and that special network of people, really staying connected, whether it's now more phone calls, even Zooms with friends, dancing with friends over the phone, and just having a good time. And actually, Ericka, I just recently saw a video with you and Ebony, and saw that roller skate in the background, and was really encouraged by that. And I think one of my good friends is on Zoom right now. She's been roller skating in her bedroom regularly. So it's just ways that we connect. Like Empire Roller Rink was a source of recreation here in Brooklyn for generations of young people. And that is now a storage facility that basically is the place to hold everybody after they've been gentrified out of community. So it's this constant war with even holding on to that which brings us self-care and joy, and that which with the capitalist structure is continuously dismantling for us. And then being with folks like you, Jay, I mean, I don't think really on campus, I don't really know that many professors. You're like among the few that was in that sort of very warm, sweet space on the first floor in the field office. So that connectivity is real for me. And when we were on campus, literally anytime I came in, I stopped in there first just to get kind of filled up, because there was other folks of color in there too, from my neighborhood. So it's like a piece of home outside. And those things are very, very valuable to us. So I do feel a lack of that by being in the classroom on Zoom and not having the physical space to come together and see folks in the hallway. So I'm just wondering for you too, Jay, what does that look like in terms of your self-care? Because you spend, I think, a lot more time on campus and in the classroom in the role that you serve.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think maybe one of the things that, listening to both of you speak, I think that is incredibly important to self-care is like vulnerability. You know, I think about James Baldwin, you can't heal what you don't reveal. And, you know, Ericka, so much of your work is a vulnerability, right? To say that this is what I'm feeling, this is who I am. And same thing for you, Pia, like from I've known you, you've always been, this is who I am, right? There's no like, you know, like you're not trying to be anybody else. So I think for me, you know, when I think about self-care, I really feel that so much of the healing process started for me when I could be, and it's also, I think it's something really powerful around like anti-oppressive practice, that we can actually be ourselves. that we can actually just be like, yo, this is how I'm feeling right now. This is how, like, this is how I'm feeling right now. And that being like, revolutionary in a world that doesn't allow us to be. So I think for me, when I think about self-care, it's just, especially, deconstructing ideas of masculinity, especially toxic masculinity, and just being like, yo, I'm sad. So when I think of self-care, I think that's the first thing. For me personally, it's just this idea that I can be actually vulnerable. I can actually feel safe in saying how I feel. Another thing that you've both said, I think that's been incredibly important to me, is like restorative communities, right? And these are all like fancy academic terms, which, to your point, Ericka, like take away from the fact that they've always existed, right? Like we've always showed up and held each other. We've always showed up and loved each other. So just to be in communities that are, whether they're on Zoom, whether they are, with family, with friends I haven't seen in a long time, just making sure that I'm creating like restorative communities that feel like honoring to me. And maybe the last piece that you've both added to is just this idea of like, what is actually bringing me joy? And that feels like incredibly important right now, to be like, okay, you know what? I want to, I don't roller skate, but maybe I should, but like, what is actually like bringing me joy? And to actually like truly check into that in honest ways, and to honor that in honest ways. Those are things that have brought me, and also the idea that I don't have to be it for everybody. I have to honor where I am at. And I think that I've both heard you speak to that, is just really checking in to see where I am at, what my capacity is to give, and knowing when I need to refill versus when I need to give. Those are things that have been incredibly important for me in just really creating a practice that feels like honoring of me and how I want to show up in the world and community.
Thank you all for
So,
that.
yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that, Professor Raymond, about Royal Empire. I didn't know that. And that is disappointing and heartbreaking. Yeah.
Yes. That was one of our early fights for gentrification.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you have gentrifiers roller skating everywhere. It's also that.
Maybe before we transition to the next question, maybe let's transition. So I think we have 10 minutes before we go to Q&A. What is something that I think that we always talk about? This is a student-led event. And, I think students are always trying, not always, but I feel like we're in a moment where students are a lot more cognizant of what is happening in the world and ways in which that they can show up. What is something that you would say to students who want to get involved in anti-oppressive work, not just in theory, but what are some ways that, they can tangibly get involved that isn't harmful to themselves or others?
Oh, I mean, I would say show up. If it's a particular population that you claim you're interested in serving, they're out here. So go into that community, connect with, if it's an organization, community-based organization, if it's an apartment building. I mean, I've done work in community in the basement where the washing machines come together in an apartment building. Wherever you can gather, I mean, we know our street corners are gathering places. So wherever you can gather, do it. So you don't have to have this formal, I think the piece about a lot of the students, the experience of being in the institution and the process of being accepted to these institutions sort of narrows the thinking to everything has to happen within those guidelines. No, if you have people that need to be served, whether you're standing outside the train station, on the corner, in the building, in the lobby, you can do that. So and that's where I try to really get in touch with, for students, the gaps. What are the gaps and where do you feel that you can serve? Where do you bring your skill set, your talent, your gifts to the table, and get out there and sort of do the work? It doesn't have to be so formal all the time. And I think that is the anti-oppressive work, to show that you have that true passion and authenticity to show up for people, no matter what that looks like. It doesn't have to be so formal, is part of the anti-oppressive practice. And as far as the classroom goes, was very happy to see your article in the syllabus the other week, Jay. but also noted that it was at the very last drop of the semester. So for students to show up for us as professors, as writers, as authors, and say, hey, we'd like to see this work integrated into the syllabus. Can we do a little something more with this piece? Can we maybe, meet this professor, so that they're also helping to bring the professors to the forefront and bring the writings and the stories and the articles alive in the classroom. And I think where the students show that support of the work, it will in turn get focused on a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll just add that, one, shout out to students, because most of our organizing movements have been started by students, or held longer, or moved in a way that because of students' actual veracity and their care, right? Thinking about the Black Panther Party, thinking of Angela Davis, how Angela Davis was a student, right, when she started doing this work. Think about, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. They weren't necessarily students of academic institutions, but they were 100% young people when they started, the Stonewall riots, right? So it's giving a nod and understanding that you folks as students are able to push up against these institutions. And I think institutions like to infantilize students, to make them feel like, and gaslight them into believing that they don't have any power, or that they need to fight against violence, white supremacist violence, by being respectable, by being kind, by sending emails, by following the chain of approval and bureaucracy. Like, you don't have to do, it's a disruption, right? So it's not going to be approved by the DEI office, right? You have to even likely dismantle the DEI office, right? It's all about really turning up. And we saw that this past week when the former president of Columbia came as a speaker to NYU. There was people who were protesting. It also requires students who were protesting. It also requires that folks organize, right? And that you get organized around what are your demands, right? What is it that you are desiring to be the outcome? Is it to have a staff person step down, to have all of the staff get paid a livable wage, right? What are your demands? And actually coming to some sort of agreement around what those demands are, and having folks come and join that and not actually interrupt what you're claiming the demands are. And that also is based on who is the harmed, right? How are we centering what the harmed wants, right? Not just centering ourselves and what we think is best, or we have organizing experience, but the person or people who have been harmed in that process, what do they want to see? What would be an equitable outcome, right? What would be justice for them? And actually getting interested in that. And then finding out what your role is, right? Is your role to bring sandwiches to the meeting, or is your role to sit in a meeting with other professors and call them out, right? What you have to figure out what your role is in the space. But I trust students hands down. I think the reminder for me over and over again is that you don't have to trust or love these institutions. You could really do a lot of work and push up against them, as long as you stay 10 toes down, as my partner says, and not be gaslit by them. But it's really hard when they're like, we're a community and we love you. No. I don't have to pay to be in any community. I'm in the Black queer community. I don't pay $27,000 to be a part, or more, however much NYU tuition is. I don't even want to know. I don't pay any money to be a part of a community, right? So it's a lot of it is hogwash, and it's important to see through it.
Thank you both so much. I think the piece about showing up is so real. One of the things that I was thinking is, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, Ericka, is that, for students to really show up and dismantle these systems, they have to really find themselves, right? Because you're actually, the irony is that most people are showing up to be validated by this system, right? Because this is why we're here to get the degrees. And now it's like, wait a minute, this is bullshit. Like, how do I actually dismantle that? So that tension, really sitting with that tension and really being true to your value, and I think is really critical for students. So thank you both for saying that. So maybe before we transition to the Q&A, I think maybe we have a few more minutes. Is there anything else that you would want to say to students, or anything else that maybe we have not covered that you would want to just maybe like bring up?
You just touched on the being true to your values. We talk about this in my class a lot. I think even before you could be true to your values, you have to be in touch with what they are. So for our students, and knowing it's a master's program, so it's definitely a range of ages and experiences. So some people are fresh out of undergrad, and I understand that, you know, it's a journey. It's a journey for all of us, and we continue to evolve in the process. But really taking this time to at least explore and unpack, what are your values? How have they shifted? And I think in this year, for many of us, everything has shifted. So being okay with that, but really taking time to reflect on what that is. What are your values? Do your values align with the agencies perhaps that you're practicing in? Because I see that shift happen a lot in the classroom with the internship experience. So I always say to students that have had me, now, as you're moving forward into thinking about what's going to be that first career launching spot, if that is an agency or organization or institution, do the values align with your own? Does the mission, as it's stated, perhaps on the website or, you know, in the mission statement of the organization, is that actually how the practice is being carried out? And so once you're in touch with your own identity and you have that love of, and respect for yourself and your work and your worth, then you're just as much interviewing those institutions as you are being interviewed for that first experience. So just really harness that and use that power to reshape if necessary. And like I said, if it's not a reshaping, then maybe it's coming together with peers and it's starting your own. And I mean, even experiencing you, Ericka, and the tremendous impact that you've made, not just in your direct work and direct service, but your writings, your interviews, your artistry through your body, your work, your modeling, all of that are different ways that you are impacting all of us, the systems, bringing them down. And I think it's a wonderful example and testament to what students can really start to rethink about what their lives can look like in practice, in the career space. It doesn't have to be the cut and dry anymore. We have to just get rid of that. I said, I have the kids, I think about that game Jenga, they play with the blocks. So we have all these systems that are like these blocks stacked up, and you can pull one piece of the system out and everything still keeps standing. So we have to be really focused and deliberate on how do we all come, or wherever our area is, and pull them out at the same time if we really want to see everything crashing down. And then we have the opportunity to build a strong foundation and build that the way that we see fit, as a way to include everyone in our experiences as they continue to grow in the process.
Thank you, Professor Raymond. I really appreciate that that acknowledgement. I was about to tear up over here. Thank you. I think one thing, just a quick vulnerable share, is that when I called out Columbia, something that I really had to contest with is what I felt working at Columbia would do for me. Right, and how being attached to something called an Ivy League, and what does that mean for Ericka's career, right? How does that make Ericka a more legitimate professor or a more legitimate sex educator? So I had to really deal with that, right? And get that, you know, that's all my own stuff wrapped into that. Like you said, Jay, like our value wrapped up into these institutions. So you really have to unwrap, especially at the graduate level. You've already maybe even done multiple programs where, you know, maybe one didn't work, or you already have your degree from one, right? And it's like, you could be a part of, you know, the educational industrial complex, which is like, if I have this amount of letters behind my name, then I'm worthy, right? Especially as Black folks. It's like, there's so much labor and work we have to do to be seen, that you can sort of start to pour yourself into that. So that's the work that I had to do, that I recommend to folks to really contest with before, during, and after you call out an institution. I think too, to remember that accountability is love. It is not a bad thing to hold an institution that you're a part of accountable. It's not a bad thing to hold your friends accountable or hold your family members accountable, right? And I think we are, not that I think, I know, our country is founded on no accountability. So it is a radical act to actually hold anyone accountable, including yourself. So making sure that you're doing that work and building that muscle, because it really is a muscle. And it's so much easier to stay quiet and to be silent about what's happening around you, rather than to look bad. And sometimes in this work, you look bad, right? Not everybody's going to agree with you. People are going to disagree with you oftentimes. They're going to be upset with you. You're going to lose friends, right? And you have to be family members too, right? You have to be willing to lose it all, right? And actually stand convicted in your truth, in the truth, right? I hate your truth, the truth of what is happening in the world, right? And actually ending and abolishing these systems.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for that truth. So I feel maybe we're going to jump into some questions and from folks, and a lot of questions are really tied into, some of the things that you both mentioned, and maybe we have a lot of questions. So I'll try to minimize some of this content. The first question is really, around that accountability that you just spoke about, Ericka, and Melinda says, as a white person, really, how can white people better support POC in our community, with kids, in our kids' schools and the workplace?
By talking to white people and dealing with your whiteness, not trying to support non-Black POC, Black or non-Black POC. I find that white people ask this question a lot, and it gives savior, right? Like, I need to save Black and non-Black POC. I need to find a way to support them because racism is their problem, right? It's just all that way. It has nothing to do with how white people benefit, are complicit, participate actively in racism, right? In an anti-Black world, you need white folks who benefit from it, and they all do. So it's important that you are looking at yourself, how you can undo anti-Black racism that you've inherited, right? And how it looks materially in your life, right? Where you live, where your family lives, what you're able to have access to, what you're able to move in terms of resources, and how can you give some of those things up? Right? Maybe there's, I don't know, the school that, whatever's happening in your community, how can you pour in resources to that particular community, especially if it's a community that's been gentrified, and most of them have been, right? What is the history of that city, of that environment, right? What is the history of redlining, and how can you do something about that? I also think white people need to petition the state for reparations for Black people. And that does not happen nearly enough, right? People get excited about a figurehead inside of identity politics, a Barack Obama, a Kamala Harris, a trans politician, but not actually giving money, the money that is due to the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. So actually using that leverage, right? The leverage that white people have in politics to get Black people reparations is an act that I think white folks could do. And it requires you to give up power, right? And you're going to look bad, and people are going to say, well, I don't want to do that, and I don't think you're right about this. And you have to stand true to that. Black people deserve this. And the US government's only reason for not wanting to do it is because then they have to actually be accountable for what they did and the harm that they caused. So that's my advice, is to also just switch the context of that question and start looking at, how can I as a white person interrupt the violence that Black and POC are subject to on a regular basis?
You were talking about young children also, Jay? Was that
Yeah.
I think also what I see often in community, right here in New York City with our public schools, is that they can be supportive. If people want to be supportive of the caregivers that are already invested in the children in their schools and have been toiling to get needed resources and educational materials and teachers that reflect the students in the schools and their experiences. Be supportive of those efforts that have already been in place for many years, instead of coming, into a school setting and negating every caregiver that has, juggled 3 jobs and still found the time to pop in at a PTA meeting, and starting completely separatist groups to advance topics in schools. Is really working together with the people that are already there, if you're saying that you're truly committed to children and people of color. And then additionally, just even in the home space, making sure, and among your friend circles, that you are purchasing books, children's books and books that reflect people of color, that have people of color as the main characters, and not always just about the civil rights movement and how, we've toiled and we've come up through hard times, but stories that just reflect us as a people. So children are seeing faces in storybooks that look like them, in when you mention the materialism, whether it's in the toys that you're buying, the movies that you're watching, the movies that you choose to actually buy and own in your house, to really diversify what your house looks like, and that you're sharing that with other friends of yours that are white, so that experience is accepted. So if you have leverage and voice with other people, that you're making this experience be cohesive and collective for everyone.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you both. Those are really all powerful examples. And I think one of the things I kind of extracted out of what you both said was this idea, again, what's your values? Like really checking into what's your values. If your values are aligned with saviorism, then your actions are going to probably be more aligned with maintaining the system versus actually transformation. So thank you both for that. Maybe the second question, which feels very, Ericka, I feel like you'll have a lot to say about this, as this is very much up your alley. And I think something, we could probably go down the road with this in a lot of different ways. But this question is, how do we encourage and protect our professors to be able to call out in, under, more with the institution, and especially with the violence and harm coming directly from students? And one of the things, as I was reading these questions, I was thinking about like the fact that adjuncts are often the ones that are teaching these very challenging courses, and are often at risk for greater institutional harm. So I don't know, Ericka, if you want to start, or Professor Raymond, you want to start?
You can go ahead, Professor Raymond.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting because I have the one particular class, so it's integrated with students going out into the internship experience. So we do bring a lot into the classroom. So I feel like from the way the classroom is operated, I allow really a space for us to unpack a lot of what takes place in the field experience, which, like I said, is primarily communities of color. So we're able to call out things in the classroom. And I think just for other adjuncts, I don't know what it looks like for them, but just being comfortable to do that, and also being ready for what comes up for folks when it happens, and how we have to sort of go over that and what it's meant for people's lives and their experiences. And, when we mention about losing friends, losing family members, I've seen that happen in the classroom, that folks, especially during this time where people are actively at home during their class, really lean into the screen and be like, I don't think I can stay here anymore. Like, I didn't know, that my parent feels this way, or my grandparent. So really recognizing that this creates a shift in all of our lives and being ready for that.
Can you read the question one more time? Jay, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I just want to make sure I got it.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we encourage and protect our professors to be able to call out in, under, more with the institution, and especially with the violence and harm coming directly from students?
It's challenging. It's challenging because I don't personally believe that this is the role of the student. I think this is the role of deans and administration, to be supporting professors, especially adjuncts. It does begin with increasing the pay for adjunct professors, increasing the pay for adjunct. I'll say increasing the pay. for adjunct professors across the board do rarely get paid a livable wage. And it's just accepted. It's just like, you're an adjunct. That's just what you're going to get paid. And that's ridiculous. And that leaves the school believing or under this pretense that we're disposable. So any harm that we experience in class is like, well, are you going to deal with it, or are you going to leave, or whatever? We can replace you in a second. It doesn't matter to us. So I personally don't believe it's the role of the student. I think when a student could speak up is if there is anti-Black racism or any sort of ism or phobia that's coming in the direction of the professor, and there are folks who do not hold that identity of the professor, that they go and speak to administration about it as well. Like, hey, I'm noticing this is happening in my class with these particular students. I'm fearful that it's likely happening in their other classes, right? Because it may not just be that that student is only doing it in my class, they're likely doing it in Professor Raymond's class as well. So you as a student using your leverage, institutions are a business, right? So you're a customer as the student, right? How can you leverage your power to make it a safer space, right? It's necessary. It's necessary for you to be doing that work as students, because if you're not going to do it at where you go to school, I just don't see you doing it as a future social worker either, right? And like really just putting up with whatever your environment you're in if you haven't, practiced or built that muscle in doing it in school, where you're likely most protected if you are not a marginalized student.
No, thank you. So the next question is really kind of very aligned to the last question. And it's how do we get involved in abolition work when we're working in these systems? And it's something that I hear a lot, right? Like really sitting with that tension that, and I remember one of my students said to me around the time of the conviction, he said, like, I really believe in abolition, but like right now I really feel like this person should be in jail and should be under the jail. So like, how do we get involved in abolition work when we're working in these systems, when oftentimes, our ways of even seeing the world is still, like to your earlier point, Ericka, is still saturated in like white supremacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's same. Like I had the same complicated feelings, but because what all that's been modeled to us is the carceral state in terms of punishment, right? Someone does something and that they need to be put away, whether it be in their room for a few hours or in jail, right? Or underneath the jail, right? And we just haven't been modeled anything else. And I think it's important for us to get creative and get imaginative about what sort of accountability processes need to begin to exist, right? And I think it doesn't work, right? I think you have to consider, right, even if Derek Chauvin was to be underneath the jail, there are still countless more Derek Chauvins. So I think as people who are going into social work, which is so connected to the state, I mean, you have to report folks if they say that they're going to harm themselves or someone else to a supervisor, which eventually goes to like a psych ward, right? That's the state. You have to call the police in some instances, right? And all of that is historically there for social workers as well. So I think social workers have to get creative. To shout out my therapist who went to social work school and moved away from it and does his own practice that is not connected to the state at all, which also I feel like when you're connected to the state, you start to see how it's not just punishment that is carceral, but even the ways that you see clients, right? When I was seeing a client, a therapist that was working directly with the state, right, is using their LCSW, right, to navigate the therapy world, they were only seeing me for 45 minutes. And then they were next client, next client, next client, next client. And they were exhausted. And there were many times that they were yawning in our sessions and just not very present. And I've noticed this with other licensed social workers as well. They're just exhausted because they're trying to make ends meet, right? That has a lot to do with how the state says you have to work and work and work, and you have to work super hard. If not, it's useless, it's silly. So it's not just, you know, punishment that we're seeing harmful practices. It's also in how we are practicing the work that we want to do. And my social worker does sessions for an hour, doesn't report to the state, has an accountability process. There's also no accountability process for social workers, right? The many social workers that I've had, I had no access to their supervisor. If they did something harmful to me, there was no way that who do I report it to, right? If they're private, right? Even if they work in a hospital, right? Or they work in a nonprofit, I can report it maybe to the principal, but what then are they gonna do, right? They don't know anything about social work. So I think we have to still consider how much the state influences our behavior and how it isn't helpful to communities.
Thank you. Professor Raymond, do you have anything you
Can
want
you
to
say that question again? I think I was listening too hard and we went a lot of different directions.
No worries. Just kind of like, how do we get involved in abolition work while we're working in the system? You know, I think that's a tension for a lot of people, like, you know.
Again, I did mention I'm not on campus, even if it's on Zoom, that often. So I just feel like it's so important to stay connected to the work with people. And then that work in itself is abolitionist. So for example, when I'm doing work with creating legacies, I'm a licensed social worker. When people are engaging in group activity, in my mind, my skill set and even the way I'm sort of unpacking the experience is through a group therapy dynamic, but they are not in, you know, formal group therapy. And by doing so, I feel like I get so much more people engaged, so much more authentically and organically, especially when it's people of color, because social work is completely stigmatized for people of color because you do have the systems involved. Just the term social worker, many people don't even necessarily make the bridge between a social worker and a therapist. In Black communities, it's often just thought of ACS, or the entity that's coming to look in your refrigerator and, you know, see if your children are in the same bed or not. So that's sort of the connotation around social worker. And just mental health in general in our communities is not often valued. It may, you might get a lot of negative pushback. There are families that will disown their relatives if they think that they have concerns around mental illness. They're literally demonized depending on the spiritual values of the family. And we find this across community of color, especially across various immigrant groups that reflect all of our collective ethnicities. So I think in that, I guess, quote unquote, abolitionist work is to really shape the work that you're doing with the authenticity that fits the population that you want to engage, that you're passionate about engaging, and not, you know, try to stay within these guidelines that don't work. Like I mentioned, when I came to social work school, I knew that I wanted to work with youth, and I was sort of told, well, this is the degree you have to get to do that. But the work was going to be done regardless. It was being done already, and this is just kind of the formality to encapsulate it for some aspects of the world. But in community, I don't know that anybody that works with me in community even necessarily knows if I'm a licensed social worker. It doesn't matter. It's, are you, you know, meeting my needs? Are you meeting me literally where I'm at? And if you're not doing that, I don't want to talk to you anyway. So I think us just really getting in touch with the humanity of it and just really meaning it when we say meeting our clients where they're at, meeting our innovators, as the Hope Center calls it, where they're at, meeting people where they're at.
No, thank you. And I think you both kind of alluded to this idea of even like, what is abolition? And really like maybe seeing abolition, you know, in this gradual phase, that abolition is human engagement in a system that hasn't often allowed for human engagement. Abolition is like imagination in how we show up for treatment and processes that aren't aligned with systems and governments. So thank you. I think that was really, you know, like helpful for people who aren't able to see abolition in like this very process-oriented way. The next question comes from Smitha, who says, what advice in praxis would you give to social workers who want to do disruptionary work, but often do not find allies? And maybe I'll make it a two-part question because I feel the other question kind of ties into it. And it's also from Smith. She says, what advice would you give to social workers who are exhausted under capitalistic structures? You know, so just like the idea of maybe doing this work by yourself and also feeling like exhausted within this work. What does that mean to you?
I guess I feel like sometimes doing it by yourself is less exhaustive than doing it within a, a very organized system. Being creative and seeing where that fits for you and your skill set and getting it done, and not necessarily always doing it within an agency context. I mean, you don't need an agency to help people or to guide people or to be in parallel journey and process. It's community. We build it, we grow it, we serve in it. I don't really see why it even needs to always have, such a formal umbrella that's restrictive.
I wonder the first part of the question is that you don't have allies. I guess I just wonder what are the conversations you're having with your own community about the work that you're doing. And if those people need to be in your life any longer, right? Like, you don't have to have allies within that institution, right? They could be outside of the institution, right? They could be working at another institution. They could not be doing social work or in academia at all, right? And still make a difference and still be an ally to you and still support you, still hold you down, remind you to rest, right? These are allies in the work, right? And I think the exhaustion does come from doing it by yourself, and not having folks hold you down and support the work that you're doing, and remind, even if their job is to remind you to take a break, right? A lot of my friends retweeted my call out of Columbia, and they also texted me, hey, I want to make sure that you're resting. How are you resting today? Right? How are you caring for yourself? These are people who don't go to Columbia, are not sex educators, are not social workers. They just know that it's a collective struggle, and they care about my well-being, and they also care about the other Black folks who have been harmed by Columbia, whether it be the folks in the school or the community of Harlem that they continue to gentrify. So I would just be considering who is your community, who are the people around you. You didn't say your politics, so I don't know what sort of ally you want. I also hate the word ally, but that's a separate conversation. But yeah, I think who are the folks in your corner that you already have, that you could be leaning on, and they could also be supporting you and lifting you up. And it's exhausting. The work is tiring. It's tiring as hell. So it does require you to have people who are like, go lay down somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's real. And I think having that, thank you for saying that, having a community that is always mirroring that back to you and reminding you of that is so important and so powerful. I also do not like the word ally. So thank you for saying that, because it makes it feel like, how can you have a society if we don't have a society? How can you have peace if we don't have peace? So, that's the word that I've never been a fan of. So thank you.
It's like macro and micro.
You know what? We actually had that conversation, really honestly, before this, because we were like, this is a social work thing that doesn't really exist. So, so the other question I think is really for you, and it's really, Beth says, I'm really intrigued by incorporating sex positivity in social work, and NYU does not have a lot of opportunities for that. Do you have any recommendations for someone wanting to explore sex positivity in their practice?
Sure. I think, I guess like a quick course with me would be to consider how you are gendering folks and how you are assuming folks' gender identity, assuming folks' racial identity, and also how that also sexualizes them or not, right? And the hypersexualization that exists around Black folks in general, right? Are you participating that as perhaps a social worker at a school or a part of ACS? How is that playing a role in coloring your impression of the people who are sitting in front of you, the people who you are supposed to be caring for and supporting? Are you encouraging pleasure in the work that you do? As a breast cancer survivor, I met with a social worker my first day of chemo, and they never brought up pleasure. They never brought up orgasms. They never brought up any sort of like vaginal fluid to it. And I didn't have a libido at the time. I wasn't having orgasms, and it would have been great for somebody to engage me in that and understanding the side effects of chemotherapy and also just being diagnosed with breast cancer, right? And they didn't do that. So how can you bring pleasure into your work and remind your clients or check in with your clients around what pleasure looks like for them, but then also what are some of the barriers to pleasure in their life considering their positionality, right? If you're working with a Black trans woman, what are some of the barriers that you're already aware of that exist in society, and how are those barriers playing a role in their access to pleasure or their desire for pleasure? Are you being sex negative in your work? Are you assuming that people have to wait until marriage to have sex? Are you slut shaming, right? A lot of folks will kink shame in their social work practice and assume that bruises are from some sort of abuse, right? But not actually from a kink experience, right? So checking your own values around sex and pleasure, but then also making sure that it's present in your practice, whatever that might be.
Thank you. And that's so powerful. And again, goes back to what you're saying around the need to, make this a parallel process, that anti-oppressive work isn't just out there, but we also have to be looking at ways in which we need to dismantle ourselves. So I'm going to try to, we have like maybe 3 more minutes. I think the last 2 questions are really good. So I'm going to try to combine them and you can both just jump in when you feel good.
We want to hear you too, OJ.
Huh?
We want to hear you too.
I mean, I'll jump in on the last 2. I feel like I didn't, I think the last question wasn't my question to answer, so I'm playing my lane. But I think the last 2 questions are really powerful and we can all share on. Fatima says, Fatima is entering a PhD program and really feels challenged by, really trying to bring an anti-oppressive like framework. She says, as a scholar, this concerns me because I'm calling out racial violence, but at the same time, I feel the extra heat. Any advice to get through this? How can my work be lifted through these racist scholars because the sister's tired? And Adia has another really great question. She says, I've noticed the burden of speaking up for my community always falls on me and people from my community. How can we advocate for ourselves without facing a burnout? So anyway, we want to kind of like go at these questions.
I would just say never forget that the United States is a plantation. Right? Like in your bones, get that it is a plantation. Like, yes, slavery ended and it didn't, right? And it's not just connected to the 13th Amendment, right? It is still very much in everything when you have white people still in positions of power, still with being able to generate generational wealth, right? Able to buy land wherever they want, able to move wherever they want without much pushback, right? Able to give birth to babies without dying, right? Without being murdered by medical institutions, right? We are still very much on a plantation. So I think divorcing yourself from the idea that academia is going to be the tool, right? That goes back to what we were, to Jay mentioned about the Audre Lorde quote, is using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, right? It's just not going to happen. And academia is the master's tool, right? The way that it's been created in this country is the master's tool. So keeping that in mind, and staying convicted in the work that you want to do, and remembering who is it for, or asking yourself, who is this work for? Is it to convince the scholars at the academic institution, or is it to free a community of people? I think you have to get, and it doesn't have to be binary, right? It could be multiple questions, but asking yourself, who is it for? I think makes a world of difference, especially on a PhD track. And then the other question, I think also remembering that it is not our labor as Black people to do anything. We don't have to disrupt. We don't have to call anything out. We don't have to start a march or organize it. We don't have to do any of those things, right? The work is really for white people to end white supremacy. It's their creation. So I totally get the burnout and feeling like the burden, not just feeling like it, but actually experiencing that the burden is on you to really shift things. But I think a reminder to just be like, this is actually not, I don't have to do this work, but then also getting the hell out of the way for the folks who are, because sometimes not all skin folk are kinfolk. And we will be in the way, right, of movements, right? We will say like, don't do it like this, or do it like this, or you be respectable, or be kind, or, you know, don't interrupt. Don't do that, right? Don't then be in the way of movements, right? If you don't, you're like, this ain't my ministry, then keep it, do something else, right? Your existence is a whole resistance in itself, right? Black people don't have to do anything. I don't believe that in my core, but I think if you feel tasked to speak out about this as well, I also think that people should be paying you for it, right? So how can people be sending you coin when you speak out in class and you educate the whole class? And when I finished my graduate program, all of my friends from the program and students who were in class with me were like, I need to give you money for my, tuition, because you taught me so much. And I see this all the time with Black students. We are the people who are bringing so much to the classroom because we've had to. We have to show up and show out, right? So I'm like, if you're calling stuff out in class and you're like, this is not sufficient and that's not sufficient, how can some of those students start slipping you some Venmo, start paying for your tuition, right? Start paying for giving you lunch, buying you coffee randomly, right? And if white people or non-Black POC are doing this, don't do this and then start telling people or start bragging about it or start using it against Black people. That's not cute. Just give the money and keep it pushing. That's the end.
No, thank you. You brought up so many like really powerful things in, answering those two questions. I think the first one, like what Fatima asks, and I've often said this to students myself, and it sounds a little bit callous, but when BIPOC POC students are often like, yo, it feels harmful in the institution. I'm like, yeah, what did you expect? Like this is exactly that. This is an institution that has legitimized genocide. This is an institution that continues to legitimize anti-Blackness. And I think there's something about that truth that allows us to navigate these spaces in ways that, are healthy for us and also allows us to do what we need to do. And I think about for myself as, someone who's had to navigate these spaces, that was one of the best advices one of my mentors ever said to me. He always said to me, you know what, the struggle is not this. Like when you have opportunities to dismantle in here, take it. But your work is outside of here. Take the tools and the resources, and your work is outside of here. And I never forgot that. And I always tell that to students, like, this is not about you. They've been doing this, right? Like, it doesn't matter. They've been doing this. This is not about you. So I think that piece is really powerful. Thank you for saying that. I think the other piece, Adia, is like, how do we advocate for ourselves better without facing a burnout? And I feel like that comes full circle to what you were saying, Ericka, earlier, and what you've said as well, Professor Raymond. If we're not cognizant of where we're at, if we're not cognizant of like our trauma levels, then it's like, we are putting ourselves at harm. So I think the first thing is just always be aware of like when you have the capacity to give versus when you don't have the capacity to give, you know, that corny step up, step back kind of thing. But then also, I think that also ties to this idea of like allyship. And if we get out the way that allyship doesn't, it's not real, right? Like we're all living in this world. And if we don't take accountability, if we all, like white folks don't take greater accountability in this, BIPOC people like collectively don't take greater accountability in this, then like we're going to continue to have these things. So I definitely feel that truth, right? That we all have to take greater accountability in what dismantling these systems look like. Professor Raymond, I feel like maybe we're, yeah.
And shout out to Fatima for being on here.
Mhm.
But this comes up with students a lot in terms of what you're saying about especially in the doctoral programs. I've heard that from a friend regularly about really trying to minimize the voice and streamline it in such a way that sort of perpetuates the same style of voice that we've been hearing from these institutions for hundreds of years at this point. And so if you're in that system and you have to get that piece done, just be really focused and understand, okay, that's the piece I have to get done for them. But like Jay is saying, it's the work, what brought you to the work? If it's the community that you're giving back to or that you're serving in, then what aspect of the work are you utilizing from what you get in the institution to bring on the outside? And you're going to bring your true, authentic voice and self to that work. If that means self-publishing independently for those pieces that you need the word to get out there unaltered, if that means whatever your art is, whatever your performance is, to get that out there unaltered, and not to be discouraged for those little nuanced comments. I don't know if some of you are on here, but I've gotten different kinds of statements where other professors or folks will say to people of color in particular, oh, well, maybe it's just not a good fit for you, or just the ignoring in the class, or you make a profound statement and it's completely glossed over. Don't get discouraged from that. You didn't come up from your community. You didn't come from your country with your family. You didn't endure the collective trauma to get to one little comment from one person to talk about, oh, you know what, I think that I'm going to drop out, or I don't think I'm going to finish this semester. No. And I've heard also, oh, maybe I wasn't supposed to be here, or my whole transcript wasn't even in. I don't know why I'm here anyway. You're here because you're supposed to be here and you're going to get it done. And those of us who are here to support you, your circle and your tribe will align itself and you will see it pop out and it will be real to you. Utilize that, believe that, step in it, and make sure that everybody supports each other, and you will get out and you're going to do the work in community that needs to be done, whatever that looks like for you. So just for those of you, this is a closeout of one semester going into another, or some of you graduating, going out, into the career path. Don't let those one comments come in the way of a lifetime. Actually, beyond a lifetime, you have ancestral experience here that is guiding this. So don't let those one comments out of pocket drive you off course. So take the work, do what you need to do for them, and then bring everything else to the forefront with the true voice that needs to be heard the way you see it needs to be heard.
Thank you. Thank you for that fire. I love the piece, and I'm going to transition to Nani, who's going to close this out. But I love the piece. I think it's really important for us to just honor the ancestral energy that we are all like, standing in. And I feel like that's always motivation for me when I feel like tired, when I feel drained. I see like this, I see hope as like a baton, like that we're like carrying from generation to generation. And it's like energizing for the times when it feels like these systems are overwhelming. I just want to say thank you. It's been a pleasure, Professor Ericka Hart. It's been a pleasure, Professor Pierre Raymond. And, this is a beautiful conversation that probably needs to happen a lot more, so thank you all for showing up for this conversation. And Nani, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, so first I want to say thank you all to you so much for coming and for sharing with us and for having this conversation with us tonight. Thank you everyone for attending, and also thank you particularly to Professor Ericka Hart. So Claire is actually going to drop all of Professor Hart's information so you can follow, subscribe, whatever the interwebs tell you to do. And then for NYU students, I hope that everyone is following, because the graduate and student workers are still on strike, so be sure to follow that. Claire is going to drop that information as well. And then on Thursday, we are going to be joined by the 4 podcasters from Melanated Social Work. They actually have an episode with Professor Hart, so be sure to listen to that as well. And then I guess, oh yeah, don't forget to follow NYU Silver GSA. That's where all the information for our this the Melanated Social Work panel is on Thursday. Thank you everyone for coming. Good luck with finals and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Blessings, blessings.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Yes, great to meet you.
Great meeting you too.
An honor.
Everyone for coming.